We have thousands of people who go missing every year, just here in the United States, and there's no discrimination on the missing. They are young, old, black, white, male or female, even children. It's time to stop. Here at Coles is still missing, and they've not found any new clues. It's women who are pregnant, it's women who have jobs, and it's women who have not received even fetal abductions. Have you seen me? Welcome to my channel, everyone. Thank you so much for caring.
Welcome back, guys, to part 5 of Life Beyond the Grave. The last video we learned that there's a possibility that Lori is mirroring a lot of Chad's stories, which are signs that she is most likely reading his book, which we'll cover later. Right now, what we're going to do is continue with Chad Daybell's life. He's married to Tammy. They've had a new baby. Her name is Emma. And Emma cuts her head. He says he takes her to the ER where she is to receive several stitches. This incident is what gives Chad an idea to write one of his first books, and it is based on his daughter. It's titled An Errand for Emma. In this book, Emma actually hits her head on a tombstone, and she begins to travel back in time. And Chad is still working for the Odin. But after working there 3 years, Chad says that he's having health issues. And he's being, this stress at work is affecting him. And this job is demanding. Too demanding because it's taken away from his private time, his family time. And he and Tammy talk about this, and she agrees with him. And they decide that they want to move closer to family. And Chad is going to take on a less stressful job. Some point at this time, Chad's brother calls Chad and informs him that Denny was going to retire from the Springville cemetery as a sexton. Chad says that his brother thought that he might be interested in applying for that job since he had cemetery knowledge and prior experience. Chad says in his book that he is willing to take this job. He's actually excited. He interviews for the position and he gets the job. To Chad, this is a perfect job because it gives him the opportunity to move back to Springville close to family, and says it's a better job all around. Researching this, it seemed that this job gave him more free time to do what he wanted to do. Maybe all those spirit sightings that he would have at the cemetery would help him with the ideas of writing a new book as well. It seemed that Chad was very interested in the dead, the cemetery, ghosts, ungodly beings, and living off the remnants of what once was. So Chad says, quote, "I stepped right into the job, really enjoyed the fresh air and the regular hours. However, following my second near-death experience, I definitely was much more aware of the unworldly nature of the occupation. When I worked in a cemetery in the past, I suspected that there were spirits nearby, but now I was certain there was plenty of friends hanging out with me," end quote. So Chad's best friend, Milt, has been passed away for a while now, but he seems to acquire new best friends, and they are not the living. It's the ghosts around the graveyard. He refers to them more as friends than ghosts. He said when he was alone in a cemetery office on a frigid, foggy days, he often sensed otherworldly visitors accompany him. It was in such days that I would catch up on record keeping, and he would catch the hair on the back of his neck begin to stand up. He felt like there was someone or something leaning over his shoulder reading what he had written. He says, quote, "I knew my ghostly friends didn't mean me any harm, but I had to smile when I could leave the office for lunch and return to find a pen had been moved from where I'd left it." But Chad was not only experiencing the good, friendly ghost, he was actually experiencing darker spirits, some that he referred to as demons. He was in the graveyard one day and he was poking a rod down trying to locate a grave. He said he grabbed a rod one more time and probed a grave once again, and that time when he touched the vault, he felt like someone had shoved him viciously in the chest. At that point, Chad takes off running as fast as he could, and as he did, a demon-like spirit chased him all the way to his office, he says. So Chad is experiencing physical, visual spirits, and he said that he could sense that this dark spirit was basically clawing at him. Every inch of his body was covered in goosebumps, and he said he was praying aloud the whole way to the office. Chad says that a few office workers actually noticed Chad looked a bit pale, and they asked him if he was all right. He tells them they're fine, but what they don't realize is Chad is having all these visuals and contacts with spirits, and he's not telling anyone around him what's happening to him, the truth of it anyways. Chad is facing these fears alone. He's seeing these things and trying to tackle it all by himself, and he's keeping the secrets. It's not known at this time if he's even confiding in Tammy. 1997, and Chad has another child. The child's name is Leah. She has a miraculous birth, and Chad said he felt like it was time to add another child to the family, and he says, but we're already bursting at the seams with 3 kids in a double-wide mobile home. He had just bought that after moving to Ogden. Also, while Tammy was giving birth to Leah, she ran into a few medical problems. The day that Leah was born, Tammy actually felt something pop deep inside of her. Then she just suddenly started bleeding very heavily. It turned out to be a very frantic situation, according to Chad. At that point, he says he gives his wife a priesthood blessing. Then the nurses actually rush her into the operating. Tammy's mother and Chad said that they got out of the way and waited anxiously. Chad says during that point where Tammy is in labor, they are scared to death, but they also felt that it wasn't Tammy's time to die. The baby was born healthy, and Tammy ended up to be just fine. But there is a little bit of a scare for Tammy and Chad because they want a big family. The doctors advised Tammy that it would be very unhealthy for her to become pregnant again. But Chad can only really look back on that vision that he had of his kids in the temple, and that one unknown child that was running into the room saying, "Don't forget about me." Around this same time, Chad is thinking about writing his books, and the one book that he's referring to is the Emma trilogy. It's written around this same time according to a book that he wrote, and he said the cemetery got hit by a big snowstorm that night. He said we had a funeral coming that day, so we were shoveling the path across the grass of the gravesite. From out of nowhere came a voice, and it said, "It's time to write your books." Chad writes that this come to him at a complete surprise. He had already written a few family histories, and he had the desire to write a novel, but he said he'd never been able to come up with a plot for the book. But Chad says that day he leans on his shovel and he began to talk out loud and respond to the voice that was speaking to him. He says, quote, "That's great, but I have no idea what to write about," end quote. Chad starts to get ideas, and he jotted down a short summary during his lunch break. Then he continues to work on that book, mostly at night. And he does this for a few weeks. Soon he was submitting a manuscript to Cedar Fort. He said they read over it and they offered him a publishing contract. It was published and printed and sent out to the shelves. He said he was surprised that that book actually became the regional bestseller. He also got a lot of publicity out of the newspapers. Chad Daybell continues to hear voices, and he continues to write ideas down for novels and books. So we're moving into the 2000s. We're at the end of the 1990s, and we'll flop back and forth a bit. Chad claims that in 2000, things come to him about the future, including the attack of the Twin Towers before it even happens. He has visions of the steel company where his father worked for years shutting down, but he wouldn't really share these visions until a bit later. Chad said as he worked on the escape to Zion, he kept having a dream that the Twin Towers in New York City were burning. And in those dreams, he's always in the street below the towers. They were both on fire and people were running and screaming. But Chad admits that he doesn't understand what caused these two towers to catch on fire. From his vantage point, it seemed like all of Manhattan was on fire. The dream had a deep personal significance. He says this is because he was on a mission in New Jersey along the Hudson River. And the Twin Towers were like the central beacon to Chad. And so these visions were actually added to his book, Escape to Zion. Chad is having a few more visions that are actually kind of worrisome. He's actually seeing a few visions where he loses one of his children. And the more that he continues to write his novels, the more he's growing in the number of visionary dreams that he has. That says that and a lot of those visions relate to his family's future. One vision is, for example, he says, is one night when he had a vivid dream that Tammy had taken the kids to Spanish Fort Kmart. And in that dream, he watched Tammy lead the children across the parking lot to the store's entrance. Then little Seth broke free and stumbled ahead of the others. He says, I distinctively noted that he was wearing a particular pair of blue overalls. Just then, a blue Cadillac, driven by a Polynesian man, came speeding by and ran him over. In that vision, Chad says it kills his son instantly. The dream obviously disturbed him, he says. But he said he had to leave to work before Tammy woke up, so later that morning he called her. And before he could tell her about the dream, she said, I got the kids ready and I'm taking them to Kmart. He said, I immediately asked what Seth was wearing. And Tammy tells Chad that Seth was wearing blue overalls. At that point, Chad told Tammy about the dream, and they both agreed that Chad should go with them to Kmart. Tammy and the kids picked Chad up at the cemetery, and Chad said that he carried Seth into the store. At that point, Chad believes that his dream visions are something that are warning him, and these are real. He said in this particular vision, everything was exactly as he had seen in the dream, in terms of the angel and the sun and so on. As you can imagine, he's feeling like these dreams and visions are quite solid. Chad also shares that the most tangible ghostly experience that he had as a sexton occurred after he buried a man named Eddie. Eddie was known as a petty theft. He said his burial plot wasn't that far from his office. As soon as Eddie was buried and the funeral was over, he said it's about immediately after that weird things began happening. He said he would arrive the next day to work and the gate was open, and the enclosure where they kept the backhoe and a dump truck, those gates were open. It was very unusual because he said he always checked the lock when he left that evening. He thinks that it is possible that maybe he accidentally left the gate open for the first time ever, but it happened 3 times that week, and he strongly suspected that Eddie was still picking locks despite being passed away. So Chad's experience with voices start to increase, and they start to get a little bit more concerning, in my opinion. He says that one night, as he was falling asleep, he heard a rustling noise just outside of his bedroom window. He just lays there in his bed listening, and he can hear a dozen voices suddenly shouting in unison. They said, quote, "We hate your books," end quote. And he said it was fairly loud. He said he looked over at his wife, but she was still asleep. Then they repeated the phrase, "We hate your books." Chad jumped up, looked out the window, but he didn't find anywhere. The voices were high-pitched and certainly not mortal, he says. Chad believes that night, those voices that he was hearing, he was being visited by evil spirits. Chad says that he had actually used his priesthood to dedicate their home after they moved in, but now he had to rededicate it. Not just his home, but their entire property. He said he was commanding these evil spirits to never to return to his home. After he was finished, he said he never had trouble again. He describes as that experience actually strengthened him to know that the adversary wasn't pleased with the books that he was writing. Their plan backfired on them. But no one has ever accused evil spirits of being too bright, he says. So this next thing I found quite interesting. We know that Tammy has been advised not to get pregnant again. But Chad is kind of looking back on that vision that he had with that child that kind of steps into his vision saying, "Don't forget about me." He said Tammy hadn't forgotten that vision. He says they both had some serious concern after Leah's traumatic birth, but they also had faith that the Lord will watch over Tammy. So she became pregnant in the summer of 1999, and they were pregnant with Mark. Thankfully, when he was born in March of 2000, everything went perfectly. Not exactly perfectly, guys, but with less complications. So Chad is married. He has 5 children. He's writing books. He's having a lot of visions. And he says at this point, he was really enjoying the success of the Emma trilogy. He was working most Saturday nights at the cemetery, and it was hard to be able to make his own book signings. But he said there was a pretty good chance that he would need to do a burial on that Saturday, so that would prevent him from being able to attend. At this point, Chad is having second thoughts about his job. And I guess you can figure out by now, if it's interfering with what he wants to do, well, this job is stressful. So he said he needed a good 9-to-5 job that would free up his weekends. And all of this background that we're going over is going to help you understand more about Chad as we go deeper into the present story that this is attached to. So at this point, Chad is making a job switch once again. He said he felt that he could take this leap. He resigned as the Springville cemetery sexton and became the Utah area manager for Access. And he's selling laser printers and cartridges. So let's go ahead and kind of cut that short there. Again, his Emma trilogy is selling well. And now he had wrote a humorous book about his cemetery experiences entitled 1 Foot in the Grave, which most of you are following this case are familiar with. Again, Chad is having multiple newspaper interviews about his books. Chad seems to be at his highest moment in his life at this point. He has 5 beautiful children, beautiful caring wife, new job, a few good selling books, and he's gained quite a bit of weight, usually a sign of comfort in a married life. But while he is working for Access Computer Products, he says he's putting his writing on the back burner. He believes that he's really helping this company achieve better success. And he also says that the Lord had other plans for him. And that's because one afternoon he receives a call from the owner of Cedar Fort. He tells Chad that he needed a managing editor. Chad had actually worked for them doing freelance editing work the previous year. They were pleased by his books, he says, and the fact that they were selling so well. He told Chad, he says, "Let me make this easy for you. You've been doing a great job." And they offer him quite a bit more money a year. He says he's very excited about this opportunity and prepares himself to call Tammy to tell her this great news. But something stops him. Suddenly, another voice is speaking to Chad. And the voice is telling Chad that this job offer is not part of Chad's plan. And this is what Chad had to say about this. He said that he's seen 2 paths, and he realized if he kept working for the PC company, he could foresee his family with a brighter future, living in a big home, living financially comfortable, and everything would be nearly perfect, except for the fact that he wouldn't be home very often. He said, look at the second path. And this second path is where he sees the visions of struggles, and it is filled with, real stressful situations. But he says he notices that his marriage would be it would be a better marriage. It'd be unified, and he believes that it would be a much stronger path for him. And this is the part that is important when it comes to how Lori starts to get to know Chad and how Chad starts going in a certain direction. Chad says that he quit his job to move forward with the publishing in the LDS world. Chad said he was putting God first, but was he really? Future events will put Chad to the hardest test in his life. Chad is one of the best at convincing himself at what he wants is right. And he is even greater at deceiving himself through the most treasured inspiration in his life, God himself. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I wanted to put on all these details for you guys. If you like these sort of details, make sure to comment below that you like these details, and I'll continue to add those. Otherwise, I can start cutting it down a bit. It's very interesting to see the mentality of Chad Daybell and to understand just how manipulative he really is. He truly struggles with wanting to be this great person that will sacrifice for the better, but it's impossible for him to do so. So it's very interesting. And the voices are definitely a little more often than I would have expected him to admit, from back then. All right, guys, don't forget to look at this face. We still have girls missing, and I'll be back with part 6. Thanks for watching, guys. See you soon.